Welcome to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMayo. A very special live edition of the Mets Pod because it is the trade deadline recap. And Joe, David Stearns and the Mets were busy today. Maybe not the frontline splash superstar edition, but this team attacked depth where they needed it.
It may not have been, a big deadline where they're trading top prospects and acquiring big names, which we saw, San Diego kind of empty their farm system almost for a couple of relievers. The Mets really attacked this in a quantity thing. But what I do like is, and we'll get into each of the acquisitions that the Mets made recently, there is some quality here too. They didn't just get guys to fill roster spots. There are some intriguing qualities to every player, I think, that the Mets brought in.
Yeah, so to recap where it's at, and by the way, if you're watching this, of course, live on YouTube or whatever platform you're watching on, send us questions. As we do on every episode of the Mets Pod, we're going to get into the mailbag. We got some already. Keep them coming. This is the trade deadline recap here, Joe. Huascar Brazoban, a big-time reliever from the Marlins, and that one was the last-minute, felt like, addition for the Mets bullpen. Paul Blackburn, a back-end-of-the-rotation starter from the A's. They get Tyler Zuber from the Rays, who's an intriguing reliever who's had a crazy comeback story. I mean, it's not that long ago. He was on the Long Island Ducks. Of course, Jesse Winker, who we were at Citi Field for his first start with the Mets. Winker is going to be a big-time bat to face off against righties for this team. And Ryne Stanek, who it's only up from here for Ryne Stanek with the Mets, we think, after a tough debut. Let's start with Huascar Brazoban. We start with the last addition here, Joe. Your reaction, what they got here, this isn't a late bloomer, I would call it, a guy with a ton of team control left, and quite frankly, somebody who has been tremendous in the Marlins bullpen all season.
A theme that I think we have of today for the Mets is, we talked about Jesse Winker on this show a couple weeks before the Mets got him. The trades that the Mets made today, I didn't know any of these guys were available. And Brazoban has been excellent for the Marlins this year. Like you said, a late bloomer. He's 34 years old. And it's actually kind of funny to say he has less than 2 years of service time. The Mets could actually control Brazoban until his age starts with a 4, into his 40s. So they
almost unheard of.
Yes, very rare. But what stands out is he has a kind of unique pitch repertoire. He has 3 different fastballs. He has a 4-seam, a sinker, and a cutter. The cutter maybe is kind of like a short slider, but Baseball Savant and StatCast categorize it as a cutter. And a changeup is his off-speed pitch. So he's kind of a rare pitcher nowadays that doesn't have a slider, a sweeper, a curveball. He's just fastball, cutter, sinker. And the fastball and sinker will get, into the upper 90s. The cutter's in upper 80s, around 90-mile-an-hour pitch. And the changeup he gets a lot of swing and misses on. I think considering kind of the price of relievers and the way Brazoban has pitched this year and being able to go more than 1 inning in half of his outings, 20 outings with the Marlins, 10 of them have exceeded 1 inning pitched. I think this is a really good deal for the Mets, and I didn't know Brazoban could potentially be available. I certainly watched him pitching against the Mets this year, and he stuck out when he was pitching with the Mets. So I think this is a good addition for the pen.
Doesn't give up the home run, strikes out enough people. I mean, this was kind of the higher leverage type of ad the Mets were looking for the bullpen without sacrificing, as you said, Joe, the prices. And I know we're going to kind of put a button on each of these, just where you had what they sent back in the system. I don't think you had a top 20 guy go in return for anyone if you factor in what the Mets draft class just looks like and implement that into your rankings. So we'll put a bow on each one with your thoughts on that. But to kind of wrap it up for me with Huascar Brazoban, you look at, like you said, Joe, the Padres adding 2 high-end relievers in Jason Adam and Tanner Scott, and just sending multiple legit prospects, not just one guy in the top 10 or one guy in the top 5.
Like half of their top 10, I think, went in those 2 trades.
For 2 relievers. So the prices were astronomical. And, call it like we see it for a division rival or a team that's kind of just been a thorn in the Mets side at times. The Marlins did really, really well for a team that just, they said, hey, we're going to blow it up. This was actually, I think, the return that was the most surprising for them. This and Jazz Chisholm. because you look at the rest of the players they sent, they got a absolute haul of prospects back. But I think it was clear, Joe, David Stearns was going to be extremely careful. He was going to solve needs, and he solved them somewhat aggressively, but he had no interest. Forget trading a top 5, forget trading a top 10 prospect. He didn't even really want to tap into the actual depth of the system in the top 15 to 20.
Yeah, Peter Bendix over in Miami, he had a good first trade deadline since taking over as president of baseball operations in Miami. But yeah, David Stearns, and this is not a surprise. I mean, we talked about this on the show for a while. If you read any work that's done at SNY.TV, I don't think there's anyone that was really telling you that, expect a big aggressive deadline where the Mets are ready to go all, quote, all in and trade, from the top of their system. They want to keep those guys in place. And I think part of this is you want that sustainable success. And part of that is making sure you have a farm system to go to. So I think David Stearns did a good job of, to use kind of a cliche thing, thread that needle where he did improve the Mets team, maybe not to the amount that fans are hoping. And, you obviously saw bigger names get traded to other teams, but the Mets got better today, and they are a good team that's smack dab in the wild card hunt. And, they're, a win or two away from being back on top in the wild card race. So the Mets are better. I think that objectively speaking, it's just a matter of how much better.
Right. And I think if you are a Mets fan that feels disappointed right now, I would say it's most likely because they weren't able to land a starter that would make a start for them in a 3-game playoff set. That's probably how you look at it. You can get a guy, whether it's Jack Flaherty, who ended up going to the Dodgers. Honestly, Joe, when you look at it, there weren't a lot of high-end starters available. I think the Cardinals did a really good job getting Eric Fetty for a fair price. I think the Astros did an absolute abysmal job trading the house for Kikuchi. So
and the Orioles trading for Trevor Rogers.
The Orioles traded. Yeah. Now, they have an abundance of prospects where they could afford to do it. But, I mean, they traded 2 legitimate prospects that are on the cusp of being major leaguers, and they will probably be major leaguers for that franchise pretty quickly, for Trevor Rogers. The Mets went the route of getting Paul Blackburn, who you almost need to look at this trade in 2 ways. Joe, I think one is the fact that, is Blackburn the starter that is going to, and I hope I'm wrong about this, the starter that's going to completely kind of tip things in the Mets' favor for not only the stretch run, but the playoffs? No. Is he an upgrade over Tylor Megill right now? I think, honestly, quite yes. And the Mets needed that on the back end of this rotation right now. And when you look at acquiring him, the cost was Cade Morris. Once again, another prospect outside your top 20, an interesting pitcher, but on the back end of the depth of the system where that's affordable. And the last thing I'll say, Joe, before I toss to you, Paul Blackburn is under control for next year. It's not always about the Mets filling out a perfect 5 rotation. Sometimes it's about what they did this offseason, whether it's Adrian Hauser, and they looked at Jose Butto like this in the winter. What do your 6, 7, and 8 look like? Because realistically, you're going to lose arms to injuries, and the 6, 7, and 8 are going to play a role in your season. Now Paul Blackburn is not only a short-term little shot in the arm for depth, but he's also some long-term depth as well.
The extra year of control is huge. And considering what these other stars went for, like we were talking about Rogers and Kikuchi and, all these stars got such a huge haul. The Mets being able to pull off Blackburn, and yes, I understand that other pitchers have more upside than Paul Blackburn does. He is your prototypical back end of the rotation type of starter. He throws the kitchen sink at you. StatCast has him throwing 6 different pitches. He throws strikes. He generates ground balls. He doesn't get a ton of swing and misses, so he's not coming in and striking out a bunch of guys. His game is inducing weak contact and getting it on the ground and throwing strikes. And one thing that we complain about a lot as Mets fans, when Tylor Megill loses the strike zone, when David Peterson loses the strike zone, that is not something that you should expect to happen all that frequently with Paul Blackburn. And when you talk about that extra year of control, Luis Severino is a free agent at the end of the year. Jose Quintana is a free agent at the end of the year. Sean Manaea could opt out at the end of the year. Kodai Senga should theoretically be healthy going into next year, obviously off the calf strain. Christian Scott, still up in the air what his elbow is going to look like when we get towards the end of the season and into the off season. So having just an arm that can be there, and maybe he is your fifth starter, maybe he is a long reliever in 2025, but it's like you said, a little bit of a shot in the arm to the back end of the rotation now, and just helps for the roster construction for 2025. And briefly to talk on Cade Morris, and I'll touch on Wilfredo Lara because we didn't do that for Brazoban as well. Cade Morris would have been the number 24 prospect in my system once my end of season update comes out, where, like you said, we enter in some players from this year's draft class. And you saw Connor Norby and Stowers go for Rogers. You saw everything that Houston gave up for Kikuchi. I do like Cade Morris, but being able to pull off a guy like Blackburn for only a prospect outside my top 20 feels like a good value relative to the market. And Wilfredo Lara, he actually was at the back end of my top 30 in the preseason, but he had a hamate bone injury, so he missed time to start the year. Came back, he struggled. He's been a little better of late, an incredibly versatile player. He could play, literally, I think he's played every position on the diamond except catcher and pitcher. So a versatile player, but a single A player who hasn't really performed at that level yet. Being able to, again, with the price of this stuff, I'm going to keep going back to that, right? The price of things at this deadline, getting a guy with the talent and stuff that Brazoban has, while not surrendering something better than Lara, who would not be in my top 30 that will come out in a few weeks, I thought was good value.
So Blackburn, to put in perspective, over the last 3 years, which has been his age 28 to now his age 30 season, he's made 50 starts. He's got a 4.36 ERA in that stretch, Joe. Like you said, doesn't walk a ton of people, throws strikes, doesn't strike out a ton of people. But the Mets are looking at their offense and going, can we just get someone that is consistent? And it doesn't have to be ace level stuff. It doesn't have to be pretty. We always make the joke on this show that if you are consistently pitching almost to a quality start, you are giving your team a great chance to win. And with the way the Mets are constructed, I think Blackburn for these next 2 months can give the Mets some chances to win. And if your number 4 or number 5 is doing that, this trade was worth it. Let's go to the YouTube questions a little bit as everybody kind of jumps in on the conversation, especially around the Blackburn trade, because starting pitching, Joe, was what was on everyone's mind after they got Winker. Spencer Gustafson on YouTube said, does the Blackburn move give way to Tylor Megill going into the bullpen? What do you think of that, Joe? We know that David Stern said in the presser that Jose Butto will be staying in the bullpen, by the way, as of now.
Yeah. I would say I think Megill can be a bullpen option if necessary in September. I think what's important is to keep him stretched out because the Mets still are kind of lacking a little bit in starting pitching depth due to some injuries and things going on, that if there is another injury, you're going to need Tylor Megill to step in and be a starter again. So I think for now, I would probably send him back to AAA Syracuse. And if timing works out on starts that he has to make one more start here before he goes down, that's fine. But I would, for now, send him back to AAA Syracuse, keep him stretched out in the case of need. And if everything is going well in September, rosters expand, maybe you could look at bringing Megill up and trying to take that stuff where it's really good early in games. And seems like the first time through the order, he's generally pretty successful. That theoretically should translate to the bullpen. So I think that's something that should be on the table, but maybe just not imminently.
This one from JC on YouTube. What planet will Ottavino be DFA'd into? Mars, Saturn, or Pluto? You always, things just change up on the Mets pod when the YouTube comments get going during a live show. In all seriousness, Joe, the Mets now have been really busy with the bullpen. And as you just said, when you add a starter, that can kind of have a trickle effect. Is there a role in this bullpen for Adam Ottavino right now with all of these reinforcements? And very quietly, a lot of guys heading in the right direction health-wise that once upon a time were helping this team in the bullpen as well.
Right now, where we stand today, yes, he does. But I think that time, if he doesn't kind of do a 180 and get back to the guy he was at the beginning of the season, where he was lights out for almost a month straight. Like I think he gave up 1 or 0 runs for almost a month. Like he was pitching really well. And it's been a struggle for him since. The stuff has backed up a bit. But right now, until some of these guys get healthy, with Dedniel Nunez working his way back, Sean Reed-Foley working his way back, Reed Garrett working his way back, I think once they get fully healthy, I think Ottavino may fall to the numbers crunch. But one thing that I will point out about the relievers that were acquired today with Brazoban and Zuber, they do both have minor league options. I don't think Brazoban's someone you really probably want to be sending to AAA Syracuse, but both of them have minor league options. So if you needed to, for some reason, you could send those guys to Syracuse.
All right, let's keep the questions going. We got one more here before we move on to some of the other additions. This is from Timothy Frith from YouTube. Will the rotation in the bullpen be enough to help the Mets get back to the playoffs, Joe? Just putting us on the spot right there. I think the Mets have done enough. I was a big fan of this deadline. I didn't expect the push all your chips in the table, and that means say goodbye to Jet Williams. That means say goodbye to Brandon Sproat, guys that are a big, big part of the long-term success of this team. And I think Stearns worked with the, chips that he had and made the most of it. And this is a good baseball team already. This team didn't need to be rebuilt at the deadline like a lot of fans across town were yelling for their GM to do. They felt like that whole lineup needed to rebuild. The Mets didn't need to do that. I think this is going to be enough.
I thought the Mets were a playoff team. I mean, it is a good baseball team. Like you said, the lineup is so deep and strong. Like we went to Citi Field yesterday and the lineup, Alvarez was out of it. So Torrens was in, but looking at it,
get Torrens out.
Yeah. But there's no outs in the Mets lineup, no sure outs. And that is a strong point. I think the pitching and bullpen is certainly not the strength of this team, but I think it is good enough to get them into the playoffs. And when you get into the playoffs, that's you never know what's going to happen. I hate to just go back to the Diamondbacks, but you could go back to the Washington Nationals, the Phillies.
Right.
Like there's examples of just getting in the dance and making it work. And sometimes the guy you don't expect to put the team on their back in the playoffs does so. I mean, just go to 2015. Yoenis Cespedes was the huge acquisition, and he put the Mets largely on his back for August and September. But then Daniel Murphy comes out and hits 100 home runs in that playoff push. So while you evaluate things on paper, like who's to say Luis Severino doesn't pitch like an ace in the playoffs? And then it's just, that works out. So get in the dance, give yourself a shot. And I think the Mets have a team that can get there.
So another addition to this bullpen that we hinted at was Tylor Zuber. This was I would call the most out of nowhere move, Joe, where Zuber is he's a really interesting guy right now. Not a big guy on the mound, 5'11", 195. He was in the Rays organization. He was once upon a time a 6th-round pick of the Kansas City Royals. He did make it to the majors with the Royals in 2020, 2021. Had some injury problems for about 2 years. Made a comeback and was originally with the Long Island Ducks, found his way into the Rays system. He only pitched 2 games for the Rays this year, and he ultimately threw about 3 1/3 innings, only gave up 1 earned run. He was pitching very well for their AAA team. He strikes out, it seems like a lot of people. He's gotten his fastball closer to 95, 96 here, Joe. They sent Paul Gervais, which is a known arm in the Mets system, a guy that even on the older side for the level he was pitching at was having some success. You were joking with me. He's about a foot taller than Zuber. He's 6'10". But this feels like maybe an analytics darling in Zuber. You don't go trade for a guy that's mostly been in AAA this year unless you're looking at him and going, man, he went into the Rays lab and he just figured some stuff out here, Joe.
Yeah, Zuber, he had shoulder surgery, and like you said, he made the comeback through the Long Island Ducks, and it's a cool story of, he was fishing, and his agent called him and said, the Rays were signing, and he's just like, I'm trying to catch a fish, stop messing with me. So he made his way back in the pro ball, and like you said, with Tampa, he kind of remade some things. Looking at his stuff model, the slider sweeper that he has is a plus pitch, so he's really kind of fixed that. And David Stearns said that he'd been talking to Tampa about Zuber for a couple of weeks. So this is not just some move he decided today. He's just like, whatever. Let's just see if we could get some relief help. This is someone that he specifically has targeted. And like I said, slider, sweeper, that pitch is strong. Fastball velocity is up. could use a couple tweaks there to make it a better pitch, but the velocity, like you said, is 95 to 97 now. So he's throwing harder. The sweeper's there. And, as good as the Rays are at developing pitching, the Mets, they're not at that level, but the Mets are doing a pretty good job of developing some pitching of their own. So I think this is a interesting flyer. I wouldn't be shocked if he gets sent to AAA Syracuse to start off. Like, he may not join the Mets tomorrow. Having the options is helpful there. But given all the weird scheduling that the Mets have with that West Coast trip and then the one day in St. Louis and then flying out again, they're going to need to send some relievers up and down. So I would suspect we will see Zuber at some point throughout the second half. But a kind of interesting flyer is kind of how I'd describe him.
And then a guy that the Mets pod was just begging for at this point, and I think a lot of Mets fans were a big fan of this move, getting Jesse Winker to basically play every day against right-handed pitching. He is somebody that can flat out rake against right-handed pitching. That's what he did for the Nationals all season. We know about his success against the Mets in previous years. This was a strong lineup, Joe, a really strong lineup, as you said. When you essentially replace DJ Stewart's role with Jesse Winker, who is getting on base at an alarming rate this year, he's got some pop, he's running a little bit this year, and he's got a pretty good arm out in right field. I mean, that is a jarring upgrade in that spot.
Winker's a big upgrade for this lineup and for this locker room. And, I think he's an awesome fit in New York, and he was kind of the heel there for a minute, to use a wrestling term. He had the sliding catch where he waved, he hit the home run. So he's had some success against the Mets, and I think it was all in good fun for him. Buffalo, New York native. I think he's excited here to join the Mets and, spend some time in right field, especially while Starling Marte's out. And once the Mets theoretically get fully healthy in the lineup, Jesse Winker could spell JD Martinez at designated hitter from time to time, because the reality is JD Martinez is 36, 37 years old and has a history of back issues. And the Mets are playing him virtually every day. And it would be a good thing to be able to just get him off his feet from time to time against specific right-handers. So we'll see as far as the timeline on Marte getting back. But, Jesse Winker being able to grab a guy like him that could fit into the middle of this lineup, the 5-hole, the 6-hole, kind of wherever it fits in a given matchup, I think just adds to an already really strong offense.
And not shocking to see that Winker was probably the heaviest return. Tylor Stewart, who, if you're going to look for anybody that was kind of on the fringes of being in the top 20, I would think it would be Stewart here, Joe.
Yeah, I actually had Stewart one spot behind Morris. I had them, they're 24 and 25 for me in what would have been my end of season rankings. Big guy, college reliever, transitioned to a starter, led all of minor league baseball in ERA last year. Got off to a bit of a slow start for AA this year, but picked it up of late. He had a very, very good July. And I think he's a guy that's probably ready to get that challenge at the AAA level. And, I didn't see where the Nationals assigned him or not, but I think long-term, most scouts that I speak to look at him more as a reliever. He has a 4-5 pitch mix, but really the strength of his arsenal is sinker slider. And I think he's a big, strong guy that could end up a big league reliever. So the Nationals got someone that I think Mets fans are going to see for years to come, potentially pitching out the Nationals bullpen or, maybe at the back end of their rotation. But at the end of the day, you got to give something to get something, and being able to get Winker without surrendering, like you said, someone higher up in the system, I think is overall a perfectly fine deal with the pitching depth the Mets have.
And the last trade to talk about here, Ryne Stanek, who already made his debut with the Mets. It was a tough go of it. We know Stanek's a better player than that. This was someone that you were kind of interested in for this bullpen in the winter here, Joe. He was having an okay year in Seattle. Seattle moves on from him. Stanek is still a guy that can strike people out. He throws hard. His best days were in Houston. 2022, he was essentially untouchable, and then was kind of average the next year after that. But someone that when you're looking for upgrades or proven depth for the bullpen, Stanek's going to be better than what he showed on that Citi Field mound, and somebody that is going to be a big part of this bullpen for the next 2 months, whether Mets fans love it or hate it. They need him to get going. They need him to get comfortable, because this is somebody that has performed under bright lights before.
So while Stanek, if you just type in Ryne Stanek baseball reference or whatever, and you look up his stats, you're certainly not going to be wowed at his baseline numbers. But when you look kind of underneath the hood, his stuff is exactly what his stuff was when he was really good in 2022. He throws hard. He's got the splitter. He's got the breaking ball. His flaw is and always has been he will walk guys and he gives up fly balls, and sometimes fly balls go over the fence. So that is the flaw that comes along with Ryne Stanek. But this is a much like Phil Maton, who's not in our rundown, but technically might count as a trade deadline type of acquisition, even though it was, mid-July. But, these are proven playoff relievers. Ryne Stanek was such a huge factor in the Astros, World Series pushes and late playoff pushes that they seemingly make every single year. So I think these are guys, if and when the Mets get into the playoffs, Ryne Stanek and Phil Maton specifically are not going to be at all scared by the bright lights of the playoffs. So Stanek was a favorite of mine. I wanted the Mets to trade for him. Sign him this past offseason. We both wanted Jesse Winker. We were a sheriff away from completing the Mets.
It's never happening. Yeah. Andrew Chapin, it's never happening. It's a carrot on a string.
Yeah. We were a sheriff away there, but I think Stanek is going to be a guy that can provide good relief in the middle innings, and maybe at times once he gets into a rhythm here, he could be your 8th inning guy.
Yeah, the Mets are hoping exactly that. It's going to be fascinating to see how all these pieces kind of fall into place with the Mets bullpen, with the guys, like we said, Joe, that are getting healthy. This one also from YouTube, from Funny Postful. Stearns didn't confirm a 6-man rotation, but what are you guys expecting? A 5-man or 6-man rotation? Joe, I know you hinted at, maybe they want to keep a guy like Megill still stretched out. Yeah. It's a matter of if they're going to do that with 6 big league starters, or if they do tighten things up. Because there's no Senga here right now. Like, a lot of the thought process with the 6-man rotation is typically that Senga needs it.
I think they're going to be generally a 5-man rotation, and the 6-man will be when necessary. If there's a stretch of games without days off, you might, call up an extra starter like Megill to, fill that spot. But the main objective of the 6-man rotation, at least for the year 2024, was to keep Kodai Senga comfortable and to work on Christian Scott's innings. Both of those guys are currently on the injured list, so it's not so much of a concern. I'm sure they're monitoring Luis Severino's innings a little bit, because he has thrown a lot more this year than he has historically, due to how much time he's found himself on the injured list over the years. But I would say for now, 5-man rotation, 6-man when necessary, and I think ultimately Megill and potentially Butto, because I think the Mets, what they want to do is keep Butto relatively stretched out, because I thought it was peculiar that he threw 3 innings when the Mets were up 15-1 or whatever it was. I was just like, you got to be able to throw Matt Gage in there for an inning or two. But Butto going 3 innings, 44 pitches on Monday night's game, I think just leaves open the possibility that if you need him to start kind of on short notice, maybe he could give you 70 pitches and may only get you 4 or 5 innings, but in a spot start that could work.
All right, let's recap the week that was. The Mets, of course, finish off the series sweep against the Yankees. They win both games in the Bronx. The Mets go 4-0 against it. We had a take H like milk on this show, Joe, and in the best way ever. I've never been happier about having a horrible take. We said the Mets and the Yankees always split. Before both series, I think we said it's just what they do. And the Mets said, absolutely not. The Mets won all 4 games against the Yankees. They split across the 4-game series against the Braves, which started out hot. The Mets won the first 2. They lost the next 2 when the offense went quiet. And then the Mets pod was in attendance for the Mets putting up 15 runs against the Twins. So a very strong week that was for the Mets, even with the fact that they, dropped the 2 against the Braves. If they just won one of those last games, things would be even looking crazier right now. The down note is Kodai Senga. It's felt like he was never here, Joe. It was just a dream. Yeah. I mean, he was great when he was, and then he got hurt. I guess the question here is, Joe, do we think there's any world that Senga is obviously not pitching the regular season, but that they are being extra delicate with a calf injury, which is a very delicate injury across all sports? You can't, it's the one injury, truly, the one injury that you cannot rush back because the re-aggravation is just insane. That the Mets are thinking maybe if we slow play this and our cards go right, or we play our cards right, Senga could be ready for the playoffs. Am I too optimistic?
I don't think you're too optimistic. I think it's possible. I think Mendoza had said it's probably fair to assume he's out for the regular season. And I would agree with that. A high-grade calf strain typically is around a 2-month injury, so that kind of takes you right into the end of September. But if he's able to work his way back, and he was a bit of a slow healer with his first injury with the shoulder from spring training. If he's a on-time healer here with the calf, I wouldn't say it's impossible for Kodai Senga to be a factor in the postseason, but we just have to wait and see, how he recovers from this, because, we've had guys like Omar Narvaez miss over 2 months, I believe, with a calf strain, and Luis Guillorme missed a couple months. So it kind of, in a way, injuries have these timelines, right? But every human being is different and heals different. So maybe he could be a week or two ahead of schedule, and that puts him in position where he can throw some bullpen sessions and some lives and, maybe set himself up to be a part of it. And I know JD Martinez is hopeful right after the injury in his post-game press conference. He said, hopefully we have him for the playoffs. So I wouldn't sit here holding my breath, but I wouldn't be ruling it out either.
You're listening to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. You can watch every episode on SNY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your shows. All right, Joe, let's jump into the scoreboard and review the week that was. Over-under push was set at 2. How many trades will the Mets make before the deadline? Joe, you went with the push of 2. I went with the over. The Mets, if you count the Phil Maton trade, had seven trades.
And the Josh Walker trade.
And the Josh Walker trade.
Yeah.
Good call. That does count. It does count. But even if you take those out, they still had 5. The Mets, David Stearns stays busy. Make sure you don't forget this next year, Joe. Whatever the number is set, believe in Stearns to stay busy. Yes or no, will Christian Scott get his first major league win? Joe, you said yes. I said yes, he didn't. No points awarded. We are now, I think, 0 for 5 on this exact category, and it's not looking to prove anytime soon.
It's not going to be on the scoreboard anymore this year, probably. So we're good
Subway
there.
Series, Mets sweep, Yankees sweep, split. We both said split. The Mets swept. No points. Over-under push was at 2 for Pete Alonso home runs. Joe, you went over. I went with the push. He went over. He finally had that week. A point to you, Joe, and you said it would be exactly 3. He finally had that week we've been waiting for where he gets over the hump. I had taken the over on this 7 times, and then the one time I don't, he does it. Over-under push was at 2 for Mark Vientos home runs. Joe, you went under. I went with the push, and he did push, so I get the point. 2 home runs for Vientos. Over push was set at 4 for Met starters going at least 6 innings. We both went with the push. Only 2 did, so the under hits on that one. And finally, over-under push was at 5 for Mets wins. Joe, you went under. I went with the push. The Mets won 6 games. I was feeling really good, and they went over with the 6 wins. Joe, take a picture of this one because it doesn't happen often. I win the week 2-1. I'm back. I'm down 39-32 on the season. I need just about 7 more weeks of this.
You need to keep going, but hey, look, that 6 wins is a really good number, especially the kind of feeling coming off the end of that Braves series, because everything was so good for the first game and a half until the Senga injury, and then the offense obviously didn't score other than a Pete Alonso late home run on Sunday for the last 2 games, and it felt like the air was being taken out of the balloon a little bit there, but they bounced back in a big way on Monday, showing what this offense is capable of, and then David Stearns went out and made a bunch of trades, and they're playing now.
All right, for this week, 6 games, 2 against the Twins, 3 against the Angels, that 1 makeup game against the Cardinals. Yes or no, will Jesse Winker hit at least 1 home run? Joe, I'm going to go with the yes here. I think Winker hits 1 over the fence in the next 6 games. We know he's going to play a lot. I'll go with the yes for Winker, especially with them at home. I think he can get it done, maybe even against the Twins. We'll see.
I'll go with a yes, and I think he's going to be a real impact for this lineup, and I'd love to see that home run come out of the gates here pretty quick.
Over under push for 5 for Jose Butto innings, Joe.
Ooh, I think that's a great number
It is because he threw 3 the day before we do this, so he's down now.
He's down today, probably down tomorrow, I would think too. I'll go under. I think it's going to be really close. I think it's a good number. I'm going to say he goes 4, but it's going to be tight.
It is. Man, that's a tricky one. It feels like 6 games. He's down for the next 2, so really 4. Probably 2 appearances for Butto. He always goes an extra inning. I'm going to go under as well, Joe. It's hard to see him getting to the 5 unless he just has to throw half of a game one of the times. I'll go with the under as well. That 3-inning appearance in a 15-run performance is really what kind of sets the under there. Yes or no, will Blackburn pitch and get his first Mets win? I will say no, Joe, because this is a parlay here. He has to pitch and he needs to get the win. And I am not a believer in taking straight odds on any parlay. So I'm going to go no.
I have no idea when he last pitched, so I can't tell you if he's going to pitch. I'll say yes to not have us have, the same answers here. I'm thinking he's got to pitch at some point this week and get a win facing the Angels potentially.
That's what you want.
Yeah, that gives you a shot to get a win there for a team that he's very familiar with.
Over under push is at 1 for Pete Alonso home runs, Joe. A low number for Pete, but only 6 games.
Yeah. I'll go over. I think Pete Alonso is really starting to look a little more comfortable. He's still susceptible to chasing that slider. We talked about that at the game. That's something that I think it's always been there and it kind of always will be probably. But I think he's starting to come into one of those stretches, and I'll say over on home runs.
I got to go over too. It's just a low number for Pete, even though Pete has not been his usual self in terms of power this year. And that means it's time to turn. I'll go with the over. Over under push is at 1 for Francisco Lindor home runs. I will push here, Joe. I will go with just 1 home run for Lindor in these 6 games.
I'll push as well. I think Lindor has been so consistent now for over 2 months, legitimately the most valuable player in baseball since I believe Steve Gelbs tweeted it a couple days ago, and he's been good since, so I'm sure that number hasn't changed, but he has the most WAR of any player in baseball since, the end of May. So yeah, he'll hit one, but man, he looks so comfortable and easy going at the plate right now.
Over under push is at 2 for Mets starters going at least 6 innings. What do you like, Joe?
Ooh, 2. Two's a much better number than we've had in some previous weeks, but I'll push, and I think, I guess just push. I actually don't have a ton to say other than that.
I'll take the over. If half the guys get into 6 innings, you like the matchups. I know the Twins can hit a little bit. The Angels have not been good. The Cardinals are obviously right in the thick of this wild card race. I think half the guys can get to 6 innings, and I got some ground to make up, so I got to differ than you a few times here. All right, over under push for Mets wins is at 4. It's only 6 games. I will push here, Joe. I think the Mets win 4-6. That's kind of what the Mets have been doing now for quite some time. That's the pace they've been on. At times they've been even better than that.
Yeah, I like the push as well. I know we've kind of rode a lot of the same answers this week, and we got to try to avoid that. But I think it's a push as well. I think split probably his next 2 with the Twins, take 2 out of 3 from the Angels, win that one random Cardinals game that's jammed in there, and boom, there you go, 4-2, and it shows where the Mets are at. That the over under is set at 4-2.
It really is. The fact that the Mets basically. Their winning percentage total is set where you're looking near 70%. All right, let's go down on the farm, as we always do. The Oklahoma State edition. Well done by our producer, Jeff. Cowboy Ohtani, who is now I think he's just Nolan McLean now. I'm still going to call him Cowboy Ohtani forever.
I think he's Cowboy. He's definitely Cowboy.
Yeah,
maybe we shed the Ohtani and he's just Cowboy.
There we go. Okay, I can work with that. And Carson Benge, new Met first-round pick. 2 two-way Cowboys, each of whom now ride with a singular focus. Obviously, they're not going to bring Benge into the system to pitch. McLean is now focusing on only pitching. So pitching for McLean, hitting for Benge. First things first, let's pay tribute to, of course, Cowboy Ohtani one more time. Cowboy is here to stay. The Ohtani nickname is not, which is appropriate since once we interviewed him, we asked him about the name. He said it was pretty cool with a good reaction on his face.
Yeah.
And that was that. That was the end of the nickname from there. All right, so what's the latest? I mean, obviously they just brought Benge into the system, Joe, so it's hard to say what's going on with him. We're gonna get there and what the expectations are. But how about McLean, who now looks towards being a future part of what we think will be the Mets bullpen, although they're going to continue to keep him stretched out?
You're going to keep developing him as a starter and kind of see how it goes. He's been pitching a lot better of late. He got off to a real tough start when he first got promoted to Double-A Binghamton, but he's starting to find his footing there. But I think when you think long-term with Nolan McLean, to me, and I said this when the Mets drafted him, and I still believe, I think late inning reliever is written all over him, where he could just strip down the changeup, strip down some other secondary stuff, just be a fastball sweeper guy, pump it for an inning or two. And, maybe he's a 97, 98 mile an hour guy on the fastball more consistently in short spurts. And, that sweeper is a pitch that can get upwards of 3,000, 3,100 RPMs on it. It's a potential big time swing and miss pitch. So a guy is highly ranked in my system, and that is something that will be coming out here in the coming weeks and update there. But yeah, McLean is on a good trajectory, and they'll keep developing him as a starter. And if a need arises or something changes, I think the bullpen is a very real possibility for him long term.
How do you think they're going to handle Benge being implemented into this system, Joe? We know it's clear he's going to be developed as a hitter, as a right fielder, we think. I mean, I know they've talked center field a lot. That wasn't really how he was projected necessarily. What do you think the route for him is we don't always, honestly, as Mets fans, it doesn't feel that often that we're used to seeing first-round college hitters thrown into the system too often. I mean, obviously, Conforto always comes to mind, but this isn't all too common.
I would say they'll probably send him out as a center fielder and see how it goes, because I think they know in the back of their minds that right field is a good destination for him. He played right field in college. He's got plenty of arm for it. He was a two-way player in college, up to 96, 97 on the mound. So arm strength is not an issue for him in right. So you might as well throw him in center and kind of see how it looks. I think for the rest of this season, they'll slow roll it. He'll probably get into some, complex league games, maybe low A St. Lucie. Like, he's not going to play a ton of baseball here before the minor league season ends, but I think they'll give him a taste and let him get a few professional at bats under his belt. And then I would fully expect a kind of normal trajectory of starting 2025 at high A Brooklyn. And we all know what that does to left-handed hitters. So let's keep in our memory bank. Let's come back to this in April or May next year. If Carson Benge isn't hitting for power in Brooklyn, just remember it's because he's in Brooklyn, and that's what happens to left-handed power hitters there. But certainly a guy that needs some swing adjustments. He definitely needs to work a bit on the inside pitch and get a little more aggressive, because he has good plate discipline. He draws walks. But I think he could stand to be a little more aggressive early in counts when the right pitch is there. And that's something that, I think comes with just maturity as a hitter, is, learning when to attack and when to work the count. But he could be, a fast rising kind of guy that, maybe could crack the major league sometime in 2026 if all things go well. I think, as a college hitter, it could be a quicker trajectory there for him.
And if you need any more proof of what Joe's alluding to, Ryan Clifford this year as a 20-year-old in Brooklyn, 136 plate appearances, 1 home run. In Binghamton, he gets called up after that.
To the hardest level or biggest adjustment in the minor leagues, high A to double A.
239 plate appearances, 13 home runs. He's got an 872 OPS compared to a 716 OPS. So when guys go to Binghamton, it probably feels like they can go nuclear compared to what they were dealing with in Brooklyn. A quick note, of course, while we're down on the farm, from Coney Island, the Brooklyn Cyclones return home on Tuesday, August 6th, to take on the Hudson Valley Renegades, affiliate of the New York Yankees, on Thursday, August 8th. This is a good one. The first 1,500 fans will receive a Francisco Alvarez Flex bobblehead. For more information and tickets, visit brooklyncyclones.com. All right, let's jump into the mailbag. We'll keep them going from our live on YouTube right here. This is from Andrew P. Joe. How do you guys think they'll balance the outfield when Marte returns? You kind of answered this a little bit. I think, number one, Marte defensively has been a problem this year, and the Mets, defensively, when they have Taylor out there, have been really good. Marte might get some looks at DH here, Joe. It not only keeps him healthy, but it's the best way to use him and maybe keep JD Martinez a little bit more fresh down the stretch.
I think it's an opportunity for giving Marte breaks, giving JD Martinez breaks, because ultimately Marte was hitting pretty well for the Mets. The defense is obviously what was lacking there, and JD Martinez has been a fantastic fit at DH, considering what the designated hitter position has been for the Mets since it came over to the National League. But having Jesse Winker having the flexibility to play right field as well as the DH spot, I think is obviously big. And let's not discount what Tyrone Taylor brings to the table. It seems like every time Tyrone Taylor gets into a game, he does something, whether that's offense, whether that's making a diving catch in the gap, whether that's robbing a home run up by 10. But either way, he robbed a home run. So I think having that defensive ability of Tyrone Taylor is big. And, Harrison Bader roaming in center, he's another guy that historically has had some injury issues, and he's missed a couple days here for the Mets. But I think right now the outfield, once Starling Marte gets healthy, if everything else is still intact, is a really deep, strong unit for the Mets.
And how quickly we forget, Joe, the speed element of Marte on the bases. If he is more of a bench rotational player, it's a totally different element. I mean, I know it was a lost injury season in 2023, but he loves the new rules. He was 24 for 28 on the base paths last year. This year, he's 12 for 12. Marte has really figured out, he's kept his speed as a base runner, but the nuances of stealing bases with the new rules, he's mastered that. So if you're in the point of a game where you need Marte to pinch run, but you still have your defensive replacement on the bench in Tyrone Taylor, who can run, but he can't steal bases like Marte, the Mets can start playing the chessboard a little bit in games. That's when you kind of empty things out to win a game here or there, and Marte can play a really big part of that. Another question we had from YouTube, EJ Decker. If Brazoban can go extra innings, does Butto move to the rotation? We kind of got to this in the beginning a little bit if you're catching in late. Brazoban can go more than one inning. He's done that plenty this year. But David Stearns has said for now, Butto will stay in the bullpen. Do they have the flexibility to change their minds on that? Of course. Steve Miller, there he is, Joe. He said, how much better are the Mets compared to how much better the Braves and Phillies got? What do you think of that? It was kind of quiet I know the Braves brought back Soler, but it wasn't a loud deadline within the division for teams going for it. The Marlins did the best, and they were selling everything.
I don't think the Braves got drastically better. Like, they added Soler to their lineup, their rotation. I don't think they added anyone to the rotation unless I'm missing something.
They brought back Luke Jackson for the bullpen. That's it. And he's not been good this year.
Yeah, and he hasn't been good. So I don't think the Braves really took a huge step forward. I mean, getting Jorge Soler for essentially nothing, just taking his contract, is a strong move in itself. But I don't think I look at the Braves and go, wow, they are way better than they were 2 days ago. The Phillies, they upgraded the bullpen. Estevez, I think, is a huge addition for them.
He's been great.
He's been fantastic. They got Tanner Banks from the White Sox late, kind of like right as the deadline was about to hit. They get an outfielder too. I feel like they did, and I'm forgetting. But the Phillies, they improved some, especially their bullpen late in game, and with their starting rotation, I think they're going to be able to shorten games in a meaningful way. And the Mets, on the other hand, we talked about it kind of big picture. I think the Mets made themselves better. I don't know that they made themselves dramatically better. And I do think there's definitely some questions on the left-handed side in the bullpen. I know that Stearns had said that, he feels good about, the Alex Young, Danny Young, Matt Gage trio that are currently in the bullpen, and they have some righties who can get lefties out. But I really was hoping to come out of this deadline with a true, lefty to kind of take the spot that Jake Diekman had. And that just ultimately didn't transpire. So they'll have to navigate it. And Alex Young has certainly shown some good stuff in his 3 or 4 appearances that he's made for the team so far. But that would be the one thing I would say that I think the Mets missed on at this deadline, was not finding a way to get a lefty reliever in here.
Yeah, you like me were hoping for Andrew Chafin, and we didn't get what we wanted.
I even had more options than that, but for you, I was rooting for the Sheriff to come home.
We thought this was the year. By the way, I don't know if you they got Austin Hayes, the Phillies, if you're looking for that
that's
outfielder.
right. Yes.
So, yeah, a depth outfielder for the Phillies. And, you brought up the fact they get Estevez, who's great. Alvarado has really struggled as of late. So they needed somebody that can kind of close the door in games. And they did get that. So, yeah, the Phillies did pretty well. The Braves kind of average. The Mets felt like the Mets, we like what the Mets did. It might not be the starstruck kind of method, but we'll see. All right, let's get into a couple more that we have here. We'll group these together. This is from Gorilla on YouTube. Excellent job as always, gentlemen. Straight up question: where do you think Baty is in August of 2025? Assuming he's not moved to this year's trade deadline. Brett Baty's still here. And also from T-Ron Robo Jim 6526. What is Baty up to? What are coaches saying about his development? And how exactly does he fit into the future plans of the big league club? Joe, I know Baty's been fine since he got to Syracuse. I mean, he always hits in Syracuse. There's no surprise there. It just, we were talking about this a lot, even when we were all at Citi Field. It's just odd to project what the future is for him with this team when Vientos has really grabbed a hold onto the future at third base. And then you wonder what's left for Baty here.
It's definitely where we stand today. Looking ahead feels, square peg, round hole. It doesn't feel like there's a spot that screams this is Brett Baty's spot. But, what if Pete Alonso walks out the door as a free agent? And, I think that's certainly something that can happen. I think the Mets would like to have Pete back. But if he were to go somewhere else, you shift Mark Vientos over the first, and maybe have a competition at third base between Brett Baty and Ronnie Mauricio coming off the ACL. Baty is a guy, he is still so young. And I think at times, and some of this is, I think New York is so much, I want to see it now. Patience is not a huge thing in this city with this fan base. And I completely understand why. But, Baty ultimately, he's still a young kid that, fans wanted to give up on Mark Vientos in April. I almost was someone that was willing to trade Vientos. You were steadfast that this was not the time to trade Vientos.
Yeah, no value.
And I think Baty's in a similar boat that, what are you going to get for Brett Baty? Like, I think someone would take him as a change of scenery guy, but he's so young, under control for so long. He doesn't cost you anything financially. I don't see any reason to rush him out the door, but right now, where we stand, there's no clear path to him, having an everyday role of some kind in 2025. So, that's kind of where we stand.
It's funny how quickly things can change, Joe. It feels like they've totally reversed roles, where the fact is there's no reason to ever think about, Vientos not being a part of the Major League Mets team right now. Yeah. And with Baty, I agree with you. It feels like there is no role for him right now. But when a guy has no value, that means he's more valuable to you than somewhere else, necessarily, or what you're getting back from someone else, where guys get hurt. Like you said, Joe, things change. Pete Alonso walks in free agency. We're not saying that's going to happen, but surprises happen, right?
That's free agency.
Left.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And Pete Alonso walks in free agency, then you have a world where Vientos is holding down first, like you said, and Baty and Mauricio are battling it out. And I mean, you don't assume Mauricio's coming back off an ACL looking like how he finished his last season with the Mets. You don't assume anything. So there's guess what the Mets might need next year? Mets might need a DH. The Mets might need a lot of different things. Things just happen. So they got to ride it out. I love that you brought up the point is Brett Baty is 24 years old, man. Like, this isn't a 28-year-old that's just repeating AAA over and over and can't figure it out. Let's see if he can reset. Let's see if he can rebuild his value to the Mets. Maybe he finishes strong, and then there's a world where he's an actual movable piece in the winter, or he's a piece that is competing with this team. And I think my number one thing with prospects right now, John, I'm sure you feel this more than anyone, is that the baseball fan, and I love that fans are into prospects because it's the meat and potatoes of our show. We say it all the time. It's what matters the most in the Mets pod is the team building aspect. It feels like because of that, a lot of people have lost sight of the thought of competition And the fact that not every prospect hits, but if you have a pool of guys that are capable third base prospects or capable first base prospects or capable arms, some of them are going to hit, and then you're going to have a baseball team. And I think that is how Stearns is looking at this thing with the Mets compared to how the fans, a guy doesn't work out the first time and they go, well, we already got a guy there. No, sometimes you just need a pool of depth because that's a little bit more valuable than just getting back depth that doesn't play a role in your team at all.
You definitely need a pool of talent. And I think there's been times where this system has been shallow, where it was very top heavy. And it was just like, these top guys have to pan out, essentially. And the system is trending in the other direction where there is depth where, you know, Brett Baty didn't pan out. Mark Vientos stepped up. You know, Ronnie Mauricio's here. You know, not ruling out Baty, but, you know, just current day, he didn't pan out for what the Mets needed. And I think another thing, and we talked about this at Citi Field a little bit, I think we have to, as fans, and I love how invested people are in the farm. When I started this, I felt like I was talking to the void. Nobody truly cared. But now the interest is so high that, you know, I have people sending me their prospect lists and arguing with mine, and it's great. And I absolutely love doing all that stuff. But what's important, and we need to do this more, is guys develop at different rates, and we have to find a way to be a little more patient with these guys. So often you hear, this guy can't play. And you look, he played 75 big league games. He played 95 big league games. Could you imagine just ruling a guy out on things like that? So I think we have to allow some development and these guys to improve. I mean, we talked about this, right? On the defensive side of things, how many people said Brett Baty couldn't play third base? How many people said Mark Vientos can't play third base? How many people said Francisco Alvarez can't catch? They all have made significant strides defensively. We have to realize these are human beings, not robots, and there is an opportunity to, through hard work and repetition and coaching, they can improve. And you have to allow that to happen. And to your point, a lot of them won't work out. That is the nature of the game. That's the way it works. So you really want to have as deep of a system as you can. So that way, when prospect A doesn't work out, you still have prospect B and C who are kind of in a similar tier, and theoretically one or two of those will work out.
I love that you ended the show with that thought that everybody kind of breaks out differently or develops differently, because we opened the show talking about the addition of Huascar Brazoban, who made his debut in the major leagues as a 32-year-old after signing 11 years before that with the Rockies. So it just goes to show you it's all different for everyone, of course. This is the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. And remember to subscribe to the show at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a review with the question, and we'll look for it for a future mailbag. And, of course, you can watch the show on SNY's YouTube channel. Become a subscriber over there as well. And a big thank you to everybody that stopped to talk to Joe and I at Citi Field. We love catching up with you guys. We love and appreciate everybody that supports the show. And a big thank you for all the trade deadline recap questions today. That's it for us. We'll catch you next week.